Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm going to give it a couple of minutes just so that we make sure everyone can come in. But in the meantime, if you could drop your name and your organization into the chat, that'll be great to kind of provide some introductions for everyone. Every time I think that it's starting to slow down, more and more people keep joining. So, um, yeah, I think maybe just another minute. If you've just recently joined and not heard me talk yet, we're just giving everyone a couple of minutes to get joined. And if you've just joined us, feel free to put your name and your organization in the chat just to introduce yourself to everyone. All right, it looks like we're holding pretty steady at exactly 50 people in the room. So that's an exciting number for us. So I'll go ahead and get everything started. Oh, and yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year, and thank you so much for joining us today for our first training of 2026. Lyft Homeownership 101, Navigating Lyft for Affordable Homeownership Developers. If you don't already know me, I'm Jessica McKinnon. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Homeownership Development Program Analyst here at OHCS. Today, you'll also hear from Susie Sandstrom and Elizabeth Thomas, who are our two development officers. Before we get started, I'd love to get an idea of who's in the room today. So I'm going to ask Talia to launch a quick poll, just asking what your current experience is with our Lyft program. This is great. I don't know. Oh, I can't drag and drop it. That's fine. So far, I'm seeing about a quarter of folks are already experienced Lyft partners. Another quarter, we've got folks with rental experience, but not homeownership Lyft. And then another quarter totally new to Lyft. So this is a great spread of partners here. I'm really excited to present to you all today. Um, so let's see. Just a typical bit of our housekeeping for you. This meeting is going to be recorded and it will be posted online in the next few weeks to be a resource for you all and anyone working with Lyft over the next couple of years. Because of this, we ask that you please stay on mute when not speaking, but feel free to enter questions and thoughts into the chat at any time. Oh, sorry. Thanks for flagging that, Susie. Um, I guess the poll got rid of my share. All right, can you see it now? Good, thank you. Yeah, so we do ask that you please stay on mute while not speaking, but do feel free to enter questions and thoughts into the chat at any time. Our whole team is here and they'll be able to answer a lot of your questions in the chat. But if not, then we'll have plenty of places to pause between sections to answer questions verbally. During these times, please do raise your virtual hand to speak. This training will focus on the LIFT program, and we'll talk about your role and responsibilities for the full life cycle of a project. As you all know, the application is really just kind of the tip of the iceberg for government programs, and if you receive LIFT funding, you'll be stuck with us for the next 20 to 40 years. So my goal today is to give you a picture of what's below that metaphorical ocean. We only have an hour and a half, so I don't expect anyone to walk away from this training as a full expert on all things Lyft, but my hope is that you'll be able to know what to expect from this program without feeling like you're drinking from a fire hose. If you're totally new to Lyft, my hope is that you'll have enough information to decide if you want to participate or not. And if you're already familiar with Lyft, that this can serve as a bit of a refresher, but do note that this is Lyft 101, so it'll still be pretty high level. We'll do an introduction to OHCS and Lyft. We'll talk about eligibility and project requirements. Then we'll dive into the whole project lifecycle, starting at application and due diligence, then reservation and loan closing, then construction, project completion, and compliance and monitoring. So let's get started with the introduction. If you've only been recently recommended to OHCS, I did want to share a little bit more about us. OHCS is Oregon's housing finance agency. Our vision is that all Oregonians will have the opportunity to pursue prosperity and live free from poverty. And our mission is to provide stable and affordable housing and engaging leaders to develop a statewide policy to pursue that vision. In our role as a housing finance agency, we provide a range of services and funding opportunities across the housing continuum. In most cases, OHCS doesn't provide services directly to Oregon residents. Instead, we provide loans, grants, and contracts to local service providers like you, who are more directly tied to the community and able to best respond to your community's needs. We're a pretty large organization. At the top of this org chart, you can see our 4 different major program sections, each focusing on a different part of the housing continuum. We sit in homeownership along with our lending team, which provides loans to homeowners and some down payment assistance options, and our team providing support for manufactured and marina communities. Homeownership programs, where we sit, provides a range of services, including homeownership development, which is us, down payment assistance, support for homeownership centers and foreclosure counseling, and home repairs. And then finally, even in our own team, we manage 4 separate funding programs in support of the construction of affordable homeownership opportunities. I also wanted to quickly introduce you to our homeownership development team. First, Talia Concravis is our Assistant Director of Homeownership Programs. She oversees homeownership development as well as the other 3 programs in the homeownership programs section. Then there's me. I oversee the policy and implementation of our direct homeownership development funding programs, including LIFT as well as our NOFA process. Tasha Worth is our other program analyst, and she oversees and manages homeownership development's share of the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit, among other responsibilities. Elizabeth Thomas and Susie Sandstrom, who you'll hear from later today, are our development officers. If you're awarded LIFT funds, Elizabeth and Susie will be your primary contacts and will provide a wealth of support through the construction and compliance stages of your project. So let's move on to talking about LIFT then. LIFT stands for Local Innovation and Fast Track. This was a program specified and approved by the legislature that requested that OHCS use Article 11Q bonds to build housing. If you're not familiar with Article 11Q bonds, these are our infrastructure bonds. These are funds used for things that will be owned or operated by the state, like roads or bridges or the Capitol building, but it can be used for housing too. It makes the most sense for rental, but under very certain specific circumstances, it can also make sense for homeownership. Because of the bond requirements, LIFT can be limited in scope and comes with some challenges that are a little difficult to navigate, but we do our best to make it work for as many projects as possible. LIFT is our most consistent funding source for homeownership development. We typically receive our allocation during the legislature's long session. This biennium, we were approved for $100 million for homeownership development through LIFT. Sorry about that. It is January and filled with allergens. All right. In spite of its specificity, LIFT is a fantastic opportunity to build a lot of affordable homes. With that, we have a number of additional goals. The first, of course, is to expand the supply of homes for purchase to low to moderate income households. We hope that this program will provide additional wealth and stability directly to the households that purchase the homes. And we hope that the permanent affordability model, which we'll discuss later, can provide stability to the communities in which they're built. We'd like our homes to support equity in your communities, providing equal access to communities of color and other populations underserved in homeownership. And we're currently working on expanding access to the program in rural communities. Finally, we'd like to support a diverse selection of housing options so that we can meet the need of many types of households. So the first thing you need to know about LIFT is that it's designed to be gap funding, or as the slide says, a resource to help essentially buy down the cost to build a home so that it can be sold at an affordable sales price. There's an example here on the slide, and in this case, an example home is going to cost $540,000 to build. That's not an affordable price for many households to buy. So say in this case, a low to moderate income household could only really afford a home selling at $290,000. If you want to build that home and sell it at an affordable price, you wind up with a gap of $250,000 that you'll need to pay but can't be recouped from your buyer. In this situation, we'd look for you to find a source like an investor, your equity, or a construction loan to cover the portion of the cost that the buyer can pay. Then LIFT is designed to cover sometimes all, but most of the time a good chunk of that gap. In this case, the home was able to receive $210,000 in LIFT, and then the builder found an additional $40,000 grant to cover the remainder of that gap. How much you're eligible for depends on your project. We award funds using a maximum per unit subsidy based on the number of bedrooms in your home. So if you're building a studio home, you can receive up to $165,000 or $225,000 if you're building a 4-bedroom home. Then above 4 bedrooms, you can receive an additional $20,000 for each additional bedroom. If your development's in a rural area, you'll also be eligible for an additional $5,000 per unit, up to an extra $100,000. And of course, this is the maximum subsidy. We will require that you submit a full pro forma during the application process. and will award up to this amount or a maximum profit, whichever is smaller. If you're only familiar with an older version of Lyft, then some of this might be new to you, and those changes were well earned. In 2024, our team, the Department of Justice, and many of our partners worked very hard to get some policies updated to allow for us to move to this structure. This change has really helped the program become more accessible, especially for rural areas and denser developments. Lyft Homeownership as a program continues to grow from its first year in 2018, awarding less than $2.5 million to last year, where we were able to award more than $40 million thanks to the award structure change. To date, we've been able to support over 1,200 new homes across 80 different projects and 27 unique developers, which has been absolutely fantastic. The program has grown much more competitive, so please do expect competition if you plan to apply this year. We do have developments in many areas across the state, but you can see that most of our projects are west of the Cascades or in Central Oregon. We have a significant gap in rural Eastern Oregon, Southern Oregon, and along the coast. We're hopeful that our program's changes will help us better reach these areas. And if you're from one of those areas, I strongly encourage you to consider applying for Lyft soon. We'd love to be able to serve your community. So I'll go ahead and pause here. Does anyone have any questions so far? Is there anything in the chat that I need to address, Talia?
Nope, I think you can keep going.
Great, sounds good. All right, then I'll go ahead and move on to the eligibility and key requirements. I mentioned before that because Lyft uses bond funds, we have very specific requirements. We can only support very specific types of projects. Those projects include new construction of affordable homeownership housing units, conversion of existing non-housing structures into new affordable homeownership units, and new manufactured home parks. We cannot currently support preservation of existing homeownership units or conversion of rental units to homeownership. Within those projects, Lyft funds can only be used on homes reserved for households earning less than 80% AMI. You can have a mixed income development, including market rate homes, but Lyft must only be spent on those affordable homes. The funds can also only be spent on costs that can be capitalized, which is most of your costs, but not all. Since we can't cover everything, we do require that you have another funding source, like your construction loan, for instance. Your project must not have started vertical construction before you apply, though you're welcome to start site work at your own risk. Last but not least, and this is the one that trips new folks up the most, is that your project has to use a shared equity model. In general, a shared equity model is a type of housing structure where the homeowner owns the structure, but an eligible organization maintains ownership of the land. It's a way to provide homeownership while keeping the home permanently affordable for the next buyer. By using bond funds, OHCS must have an ongoing operational interest in the property. We do that by filing an operating agreement and an affordability covenant on the land, but because of that, the land can't be sold to the home buyer. And there are a lot of different kinds of shared equity models that work with our program. All of them are included here on the slide. The first and most common is the land trust model, which includes but is not limited to community land trusts. This model follows our most basic requirements. You as the organization own the land, your home buyer owns the home and enters into a ground lease with you. As part of the ground lease, you determine how much equity your home buyer is able to take when selling the home and how much you're able to keep that home affordable. In a leasehold condo setup, you as the organization would maintain ownership of the land, and then you'd enter into a ground lease with a condo association, which typically you'd also set up. The condo association would then manage any shared areas in the development. Our program can also support manufactured home parks as long as a nonprofit organization or co-op owns the park and the homeowners own their individual units. To be eligible for LIFT, manufactured homes must be permanently affixed to the foundation and cannot be considered personal property. We can support a traditional co-op model outside of manufactured home parks as well, such as in a condo development. In these cases, the co-op can own the land themselves or they can lease the land from a nonprofit. Finally, we can also support limited equity co-op models. This is a new addition to our portfolio and a unique structure in which the homeowners do not individually own their units. Instead, the homeowners will buy into the co-op itself, and the co-op will collectively own the structures through a permanent loan. Each member of the co-op will pay a monthly lease to cover their shared mortgage, their reserves, and any other expenses. Like traditional co-ops, they can either own the land or lease the land from a nonprofit. Then the last and perhaps most important eligibility requirement is for the applicant. We can only provide LIFT funding to an organization that meets the definition of an eligible covenant holder, which is something defined in statute. This includes a public body, government organization, nonprofit organization, co-ops, and federally recognized tribes. This is because, as I mentioned before, to meet those bond requirements, we have to file an affordability covenant on the land, and these organizations are the only ones who can actually enforce those covenants. In case we have any tribal partners in the room, I wanted to specifically mention that while you are an eligible covenant holder, we unfortunately are not able to provide funding to any developments on tribal lands. However, if you are developing tribal housing off of tribal lands, you are absolutely welcome to apply. Another important note here is that you may notice that we cannot support for-profit organizations or private entities, but that doesn't mean that you can't take part in a LIFT project. If you're not an eligible covenant holder or you don't have any interest in becoming a shared equity provider, that's okay. Not every organization needs to do everything on their own, and we'll review and consider your whole project team. In the case of eligibility, we really look at three main roles. We have the applicant or the organization, which will be responsible for LIFT during construction. We have the actual developer, and then we have the long-term steward with the shared equity model. You can meet all of these roles on your own or with 2 or even 3 different organizations. So whichever organization submits the LIFT application will be our applicant. They'll also be the borrower of the LIFT loan. This organization must be an eligible covenant holder, like a nonprofit. They must own the land by the closing of the LIFT loan so that we can file that operating agreement with them. And they'll be the organization that receives all of our payments and be responsible for maintaining compliance. The second role is the developer. This entity needs to be experienced in development, but can be a nonprofit, for-profit, or private entity. We'll consider this person third party and they won't have any responsibility for the LIFT loan, though we do encourage our partners to have very clear development agreements if they're separate parties. The last entity is the long-term steward, who will be responsible for the homes and compliance with LIFT for the next 20 or 40 years. This organization must be an eligible covenant holder and must take ownership of the land after all homes have been sold. Something new this year as well is that your long-term steward must also have at least one staff member or have a contract with a property management company or a similar entity. So say you're a Habitat for Humanity affiliate ready to move to a land trust model, you can apply, you can build your own homes, and you'll take responsibility for the long-term compliance. You meet all of these roles yourself. Say you're a nonprofit community land trust, but you don't have any development experience, you can hire a third-party developer to provide all the support that you need. We've also worked with applicants who are more akin to housing advocates. They don't have any development experience or any interest in maintaining the homes long-term. but they really want affordable housing in their area. In these cases, the applicant might hire a for-profit development company and then partner with a larger community land trust in their area to take on the homes after they've been built and sold. Finally, you may be a for-profit developer interested in building your own affordable housing projects. While you can't apply or borrow from us directly, you can absolutely find a nonprofit organization willing to partner with you. That organization can apply on your behalf and become the lift borrower. You'll need to transfer your land to them, and they will need to pass through any payments to you. If they're not experienced in development, we may request that you provide some kind of guarantee with us to ensure that that nonprofit isn't left stuck with a loan and no developer, essentially. And then finally, something I've already mentioned a couple of times now is that LIFT is a loan, not a grant, but it's a special loan that hopefully you will never have to pay back. So the quick loan terms are that LIFT is a 20-year loan with 0% interest and no monthly or annual payments. When you close on the LIFT loan, you'll sign legal documents, including that operating agreement and the first position lien on the land and future improvements of your development. We can share first position with your construction lender if you have one. Once you build the homes and are ready to sell, we'll release the lien on your improvements so that your buyer can get a mortgage, but we'll keep that lien and operating agreement on the land. After 20 years, the affordability covenant will expire and your loan will become due. And at this time, you can choose to repay the LIFT loan in full, or you can renew the operating agreement and affordability period for an additional 20 years. And I'll talk about this again a little bit later in the presentation. And this is another good point to pause. Are there any questions on the eligibility requirements?
Jessica, we had a question in the chat from the slide before. Can a non-eligible applicant be part of the long-term steward or only on the developer side? And you may have addressed this, but just wanted to make sure the question was fully answered.
Sure. In the case of the long-term steward, it's important that the organization that owns the land and is responsible for the LIFT loan does meet that eligible covenant holder definition. You can absolutely still be involved as a third-party organization, but I think like in the ownership level, you would maybe need to remain as a contractor or something similar. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, Bill, let us know if that doesn't answer the question and we can clarify more. And then are other people hearing a weird echo? I'm not hearing it, but Robin says that they're hearing a weird echo. Oh, okay. Tabitha, you're hearing it too. Uh-oh. Can everyone make sure they're muted? Sometimes that is the reason.
Also, I apologize, there's yard people doing work outside, so if you're hearing noise on my end, that's what that is.
Okay, it looks like there's no rogue unmuted person out there. So we apologize for the echo and I hope it clears up over time.
Yeah, I did hear an echo a little earlier, but it cleared up for me as well. Are there any other questions that I need to address on this eligibility side before moving forward? All right. Then I'll. Oh, sorry, go
Jessica, I'm
ahead.
sorry, I don't, did this one get answered? Please confirm that any nonprofit can apply as a LIFT applicant for the team.
Yeah, a nonprofit is an eligible covenant holder. You will need to meet our experience and capacity standards, which will come out with the NOFA, and we'll talk about that more in our training next week. But yeah, a nonprofit is an eligible covenant holder for this for this program. All right, well, I'll go ahead and move us forward. And if there's more questions, there will be more time and plenty of pauses, or as I said before, go ahead and put them in the chat as well. So I'll move on to our general program life cycle, and we'll try to stay in the high level here, giving you some important information that can guide your decision making without going too into the weeds on each of these topics. There will be plenty of time during your 3 to 40 years working with us to get this information a second, third, fourth, 10th time. Oh, sorry, I jumped through things. Okay. And I'll start with the concept proposal and due diligence information, but I'm going to keep this section a little brief since we have a whole other training on it next week. So LIFT will be provided through a Notice of Funding Availability, or NOFA. This will be a first come, first served process rather than a competitive one, and applicants will need to meet certain minimum requirements, including documentation and fairly extensive scoring criteria. For 2026 and 2027, we've moved to a biennial NOFA process, which you'll learn more about in the next training. Applicants will follow this general process shown here. You'll start with an intake form available online. This will serve as a sort of notice to apply and give us enough information to know if you meet those general eligibility requirements that I shared earlier. If your intake is accepted, we'll get you invited to Procorum, which is our application and project management system. You'll use this for your application and then stick with it through construction and into compliance and monitoring. We have some separate trainings available online to help you with this system if you need them in the future. Once you have access to the system, you'll be able to work on and complete your concept proposal, which is a little less than half of the application, and will focus on readiness and experience and capacity. Meeting minimum standards here will put you in line for the first come, first serve process. If there are funds available for you, you'll be invited to complete the next step, which is our larger due diligence. So you won't have to do anything else if there aren't any funds available. This due diligence step will include the remainder of the application and more narrative-driven scoring, as well as other due diligence tasks. This will be a longer timeline. You'll have around 6 months to complete this section. And then finally, once we've gone through all of the due diligence, we'll be able to reserve your funding and move you on to closing of the loan. I did want to call out here that all projects seeking funding from LIFT will need to receive approval from Housing Stability Council. This council is our advisory body appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate, and they help to guide our policies, decisions, and certain expenditures. Housing Stability Council typically meets the first Friday of every month, and it'll take a few weeks for us to run through our internal process to get prepared for that meeting. So if you apply and work through your due diligence, just make sure to plan ahead for that time. Public comment will also be allowed for our LIFT recommendations, so definitely feel free to come and talk about your projects if you'd like to. Now, for the sake of time, I won't stop and take questions on this, and will instead advise you to come to the next training next week to get more information on the NOFA and this process. And with that, I'd like to hand things over to Susie to talk about your funding reservation and closing the LIFT loan.
Great, thanks, Jessica. All right, so I'm first going to talk about the reservation letter. So once you have completed the required actions in that due diligence period and Housing Stability Council has approved your project, you will receive a reservation letter from OHCS. This serves as the official notice that we are committing these funds to your project. Of course, this is still conditional on a few final steps that will prepare us for the ultimate goal, which is closing the LIFT loan. And I will go over those final steps in the next few slides. Also, the reservation letter serves as the official start point of the project, meaning that the date on your reservation letter determines how soon you should begin and complete certain actions like construction and home sales. So for example, you can see on the slide, within 3 years of the reservation letter date, you should have completed construction. And within 3 years and 6 months of the reservation letter date, all the new homeowners should have purchased their new home. So next slide, please. Okay, another step is legal documents. So like any loan, OHCS has loan documents or legal documents that the borrower will sign. And we have different templates depending on your organizational structure. So for example, Jessica shared a slide with the different shared equity models like a condo or a manufactured home park. So we do have different legal document templates that address a certain type of model, but substantively the documents are the same. So all model types will have an operating agreement, a trust deed, or maybe two, a promissory note, and a loan agreement. So for sure, 4 to 5 legal documents. Also, if you have additional loans, like a bank that's providing a construction loan, you may need an intercreditor agreement or a priority and subordination agreement. So we, OHCS, will generate the loan documents and get their approval from the Department of Justice, DOJ, at which point we will pass the documents to you, the borrower, and you will review them and approve them. So sometimes the borrower may want to negotiate language in the legal documents with the Department of Justice, which you may do, but you will be billed for DOJ's time. So that is certainly something to keep in mind, as those charges can add up. So next slide, please. Again, this is just a high level overview. As Jessica said, we're going to have plenty of time to get into the weeds on these things down the road. So next, insurance requirements are another necessary step to address prior to closing the loan. All 3 of these entity categories, applicant, architect and licensed professionals, and the general contractor, will need to carry insurance at the time of loan closing. And once construction is complete, the borrower will still need to carry insurance for the lifetime of the LIF loan. So these details will be outlined in the NOFA and your reservation letter. Next slide, please. This brings us to the final step for closing on your LIF loan. Similar to a loan closing for a home purchase, the LIF loan closing will happen through an escrow and title company. So you, the borrower, will open an escrow with a title company of your choice. At that point, you will work closely with us at OHCS. That would be Elizabeth Rise, your development officer, the escrow officer, and any other relevant parties to prepare for this closing. Ultimately, you'll sign the loan documents and they'll be recorded. And during escrow, you will need to pay 3 OHCS charges, and these charges may not be paid with LIF funds, so you will need to have another source for that. Just so you have a ballpark figure for the amounts we're talking about, the 2% recipient charge is based on your LIF award amount. Document prep of $300 is per legal document. So if you recall from a previous slide, that would be a minimum of 4 to 5 legal documents, maybe 1 or 2 more, so a ballpark of about $2,000. And lastly, the Department of Justice charges. We estimate $750 per recorded document, so that's in the ballpark between $3,000 and $3,700, more or less. And depending if you had negotiations with the Department of Justice, you may be billed for those pass-through charges up to 3 months after closing the loan. So OHCS's role, of course, is to support you through this process. For example, if you want to use the LIF funds to pay for land or other eligible costs at closing, we can work with you on that. We will help answer questions, make sure that you've met all the requirements prior to closing, provide escrow instructions to the title company, etc. So once we have successfully closed the LIF loan, we celebrate for a minute, and then you are able to start construction of the homes. So I went through that fairly quickly because, again, it's high-level overview, but I will stop for any questions. Great. All set? Okay. So at this point, then, I will pass the mic back to Jessica, who will present the construction phase.
Thanks, Susie. I did hear a couple of voices pop on just a second ago. Did someone have a question or? did we just get a voiceover? All right, well, hearing nothing further, then great. Yeah, I'll go ahead and move forward. And yeah, thanks again, Susie, for that part of the presentation. I'll kick us off for the construction phase before handing things over again. First, we do have some construction standards for your development. If you refer to our lift manual, we do have a table for the minimum sizes of units, which I have copied here on the slide in green. We do allow for exemptions to these sizes, but you'll need to provide a reasonable explanation in writing for why a similar or why a smaller size is acceptable. To approve these, we'd want to see explanations like that you're serving seniors who are looking for smaller homes, or that you're providing additional community or recreation space on the development site that can make up for those smaller units, or similar explanations to that. We require that all homes be built with a minimum 30-year standard and, of course, meet all local codes. OHCS does have a document called the Core Development Manual that loosely applies to homeownership. But if you've ever read it, you may have noticed that it's fairly targeted towards multifamily rental development. So if you're ever looking at that or have any questions about the Core Development Manual, I'd recommend focusing on what's called the DSO checklist, which is section 6.1, and use that as a general guide for your development standards. If there's something that's obviously for rental or multifamily build, then you can skip it. Also, if it's something that we award points for in the application, then it is not mandatory. I know that that's a little in the weeds, but it is a common question that I get from folks looking to expand into homeownership development from rental. And we do have a lot of those folks in the room today, which I'm excited about. So I hope that this can kind of preemptively answer those questions for you. Another construction-related question we get sometimes is regarding vertical integration, specifically if you're a developer and also serving as your own general contractor. We do have a fairly strict policy on identities of interest, which is when you're hiring an entity related to you or your organization. You being your own general contractor is one example, or having a sister company that's your general contractor but shares staff or board members. An identity of interest could exist if your organization is hiring one of your board members' companies to do work, or, for example, if a contractor is directly related to you as a person. We want to avoid undue profits or, of course, potential corruption, so we do have a few rules around this. The first is that you need to disclose this to OHCS, and you can't include any preferential treatment or compensation beyond what would normally be reasonable for that service. And then in the case of the identity of interest being with the general contractor, you'll have a slightly lower allowable general contractor fee. And now I'll go ahead and pass things over to Elizabeth to cover the rest of the construction phase.
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Thomas. I'm also one of the development officers like Susie Sandstrom, and I'll be here to walk you through a lot of the requirements of your lift loan as you go through. And first, I'm going to talk about our equity and contracting program. This program was designated by the Housing Stability Council in 2021. And the purpose is to increase participation by certain firms in construction that is funded by OHCS. So we're going to ask you to report on some of these construction costs and what you're paying to these specific types of entities, which are minority business enterprises, women-owned business enterprises, emerging small businesses, and veteran business enterprises. Now, these are categories that were developed by the Certification Office for Business Inclusion and Development, COVID, but the folks that you're hiring, they don't have to be certified by COVID to be eligible for this program, so they can self-identify. And one thing we get a lot too is folks don't consider their soft cost contractors in this. So you can report what you pay to, say, your engineer, your surveyors, your appraiser, and that sort of thing. The goals for the program, they're aspirational goals. We ask you to shoot for these certain goals. And if you're in the Portland metro area, that's going to be 30%. Everywhere else in the state is 20% participation. And we ask you to do 2 reports throughout the life of your loan. And the first one is due 30 days after you close. And it's to help you, know what that report is and get used to that, what that report would look like and what you need to track. The second report is due 90 days after the last home is sold. Next slide, please. Also, this is really important. Once your loan closes, you're going to want to know how to get those funds. And so we have draw requests, and we have a process for that. So funding is for reimbursement of costs paid, or if you have a current invoice. And while your award is based on units, you don't need to spread out the funds on all those units. You can use your entire funding for, site infrastructure or the first 3 units or something like that. You can also draw for costs that were incurred prior to closing of your LIFT loan. And the cutoff date is 12 months prior to the launch of this year's NOFA. So if the NOFA is launched in January of 2026, you can include costs up all the way back to January 2025. You're going to be able to submit these draw requests on a monthly basis, and we have a form to do that. We also have detailed instructions that we'll provide for you, and we're always happy to walk you through that process. Funds will be dispersed in about 6 to 10 days after we have a complete and correct draw request. So sometimes we might get a draw request that needs a little bit of changes, so your development officer will help you fix that. And funds are directed towards a bank account, an ACH account of the LIFT borrower. We don't send out checks. Next slide, please. Eligible expenses. Now, again, we're doing high-level overview. So when you get to this point, we do have a lot of detailed information on what are eligible expenses. And your development officer is always going to be there to help you figure out which expenses you can ask for reimbursement for draws. And generally, allowable costs are the things like this. So the land acquisition cost, as well as if you had a loan for a land acquisition, we can pay off like a land acquisition program loan or other loan. In some cases, demolition of maybe existing structures, site work and infrastructure, and of course, construction materials and direct labor for your vertical construction, your professional or soft costs like engineering, surveys, architecture, and design, your construction loan interest and fees, but not the construction loan principal. And as I said earlier, land acquisition and pre-development loans with our new program. And then other charges that are directly attributed to the project's intended use. Generally, unallowable costs, and these are unallowable due to statutory requirements, are OHCS and other state charges. You'll have to come up with another funding source for that. Administrative costs for your company or your organization, debt reduction of your principal, your construction principal, other than those land acquisition loans that I've talked about. Any public infrastructure that's not specifically for the project. Moving or relocation costs, operating costs, and certain labor costs if you serve as your own general contractor. And again, we have very detailed instructions and documents that we can share with you to help you, know what is allowable or not. Next slide, please. Next is home sales, our ultimate goal. And we do ask you to report on your home sales. So LIFT, first of all, does not impact a buyer's ability to get a traditional mortgage. We fixed our loan documents for that. And typically, we're going to release the lien that we have on those improvements, either at the time of the home sale or, when the buyer gets their mortgage or prior to that. Once you've sold this home to your eligible home buyer, within 30 days of the closing, you need to provide us with documentation. And it's a form that we'll provide for you called an income certification form. And we're going to ask you to report on household size and what their income is. We also ask for demographic data for the home buyer, something that we have a form the home buyer can fill out. Now they can opt out of providing certain information. But in that case, we still ask you to submit the form. There's a checkbox mark that says, that they choose not to provide that information on the form. Next slide, please. A little bit more information about those income certifications so you know what to expect as you're choosing your home buyers. We're going to give you detailed instructions well before you get to that point, but just so you know, we loosely follow Housing and Urban Development's Part 5 income verification standards. You can Google that and get that online easily. It does not follow a typical underwriting process. We don't count the same types of income that, say, a mortgagor will count. Again, your borrowers must be below this 80% area median income at the time of application. So when your borrower actually applies. So it's not the date of the home sale. And income is determined by incomes from household members, except for those who are over 18 and are attending an accredited college, like my son. We may calculate the average, or you may calculate the average income over, say, 3 years. If they have a fluctuating income, maybe they have seasonal income or they've got a different job. And we have very specific eligible and ineligible incomes that are included in that total number. And those are going to be on this detailed instructions that we'll give you at that time. Next slide, please. So finally, additional requirements, and I'll go over this really quick. We're going to ask for a recorded copy of your ground lease once you've recorded that. We're going to ask you to do quarterly progress reports, and we have a form available online that has all the questions that you can fill in the blanks and click the submit form. We ask for annual document updates for things like your financial statements, your tax returns, and your certificates of insurance. And then finally, when you get your certificates of occupancy, those are due to be uploaded and sent to us within 30 days after their issue date. And with the home sales, again, that income verification needs to be turned into us within 30 days. I think I'm going to give it back to Jessica, and I think we might have some questions.
Yeah, I'll pause for questions right after this slide.
Okay.
And then, yeah, feel free to answer the questions once they come up, Elizabeth. Great. Yeah, thanks so much, Elizabeth, for that part of the presentation. I just wanted to say one last thing for the construction phase, which is what happens if something goes wrong? We definitely understand that housing development is unpredictable, so we try to include flexibility in our policies where we can. So if you're in the middle of construction and something happens, like you have cost overruns or you encounter significant delays or one of your contractors does something wrong or not according to plan, please just contact your development officer, Elizabeth or Susie, as soon as possible. Our goal here is to build affordable homes. It is not to punish you if things ever go wrong. So if you reach out to us, our first actions are going to be solutions oriented. It is not likely that we'll be able to provide you any additional lift funds, but we still will do our best to make sure that you'll be able to finish your project. We can meet with you to talk about project solutions like value engineering, scope reduction, and other strategies that may be eligible under our program. We can try to connect you with other resources that we're familiar with if they're available. We can potentially extend deadlines, propose potential solutions using mixed income development, or work with any ideas that you might have to see what's reasonable and allowable under the LIFT program. So please don't ever be afraid to reach out. Our whole team and all of our jobs are focused on helping you build housing, and that's what we want to do. So yeah, now I'll go ahead and pause and see if there are any questions about the construction phase of LIFT.
Jessica, I'll just mention, Robin asked a great question about public road or infrastructure costs. We're just double checking on that. So I put a preliminary answer, but we'll follow up soon.
Thanks, Talia. Any other questions anyone wanted to ask outside of the chat, or if not, I like all of these questions being answered in the chat. And I guess I'll note that the questions that are being answered in the chat, we are going to post this recording and we'll find somewhere, some way on our website to kind of use these questions to be the start of a frequently asked questions page. So whatever's being answered in the chat will be posted online. Great. Well, hearing no other questions, I'll go ahead and move on to the project completion stage, which focuses on what you need to do once construction is complete. As with many other tasks, your development officer will reach out to you once your project seems to be wrapping up, just to let you know what all will need to be done at this stage. In general, we have a small packet of forms that you'll need to fill out, and you'll need to send us a few items finalizing your project. At some point during construction, you'll need to send us a final subdivision plat map if it's changed since your application, or you were in the middle of the replat during the application cycle. If you didn't send us your recording ground lease before, we'll definitely need it by this point. We'll want to see a photo of the exterior of each home. You'll need to fill out a form reporting the actual facts and features of the homes that you built, a form for your final equity and contracting report, and then you'll need to send us a final updated pro forma with your actual final sources and costs. The final pro forma is something that trips folks up sometimes, so I just wanted to provide a little additional information for you here. Of course, all of this will be provided to you when the time comes, and your development officer will be able to assist you with anything. Basically, the final pro forma is just the actual numbers from your development. So your actual funding sources, your actual sales prices, and your actual costs. If you included contingencies in your application, which you'll need to, those should be attributed to actual costs or profit in the final pro forma. The main thing we'll be looking at here is to ensure that your developer fee meets our requirements. For 2026 and moving forward, the maximum developer fee will be 14%, including certain consultants performing tasks typically done by the developer. And I'll talk more about that at the next presentation next week. For older projects, you can see your maximum in the NOFA document for the year that you applied. If you sell for higher than expected, or don't use your contingency, or costs come in lower than you budgeted for, and your profit is too high, there are some solutions to that. In a worst case scenario, you can return the excess profit to us, or what we recommend is that you propose some ways to roll those dollars back into your project in a way that will benefit your homeowners. So if you know early that you're going to have too much money, you can reduce the price of some of your homes to kind of make that balance out, or you could put them in funds to support homeowner repairs or invest them in like shared infrastructure in your development, things like that. And if you're going to be your own land steward, then that's really everything that you need to do to complete your project and transition to long-term monitoring. If you'll be transferring the property to another organization to be the long-term steward, then now is the time to do that. Your development officer will walk you through this process if it's required. On your end, you'll need to sell or otherwise transfer the property to the organization that will steward the homes. And then on our end, we'll work with DOJ to make any required amendments to the documents to move the loan and the responsibilities to the new landowner. We actually haven't done this yet, so we're still figuring out the process a little. Probably there will be an escrow process. But we'll definitely work with you on that if this is the path that you decide to move forward with. And then I know that this was only 3 slides, but are there any questions about the completion phase? All right, well then let's go ahead and move on to the final stage of the program, which is compliance and monitoring. This will be what you'll do for the next 20 to 40 years after building your project. Your biggest role is going to be ensuring that your project continues to comply with the operating agreement. And then the biggest piece of that is going to be maintaining that 80% AMI affordability. And that affordability period on your first operating agreement is going to start with the sale of your first home, and it'll end either 20 years after the final home sale or 23 years after you receive your reservation letter, whichever of those is later. You'll also be responsible for ensuring that the property remains habitable throughout the life of the lift loan. This should really be a requirement written into your ground lease with your buyers, and you should have some kind of process for monitoring your portfolio over that time. The other big responsibility is ensuring that your homeowners continue to meet the requirements of your ground lease and our lift requirements. One of those is that your home buyers must continue to occupy the home as their primary residence so that they can't move across the country and rent out their home, essentially. But you don't need to continuously monitor their income. They only need to qualify when they purchase the home. It is okay and desirable for their incomes to grow over time. Instead, any income verifications that you'll do will be with subsequent home sales. We see these 3 items as the most likely reasons your home may change hands. The first case is a home buyer who's ready to sell their home and move on. While we encourage you to buy back the home and move it through your supportive home buyer process, you're not required to do so. You are required to complete an income verification with any new buyer and send that and the demographic form to us, those forms that Elizabeth talked about. The next example and a question that we occasionally receive is what happens if a homeowner passes away? If they have any heirs who wish to move into the home and occupy it as their permanent residence, that's okay for our program. For us, we don't mind if they're income eligible or not, but you can determine your own policy on that, and we recognize that some other funding sources may not allow it. In this case, you'll need to submit that income and demographic information to us, even if they earn more than 80% AMI, just so that we can keep that on record. If they don't wish to inhabit the property as their primary residence, the home will need to be sold to a new eligible buyer. Finally, what happens if a mortgage provider forecloses on one of your buyers? This is something that we've done a lot of work on recently with our partner lenders, and the resolution in this case is that the property that is foreclosed on will be released from all liens and operating agreements, and the bank can proceed with the foreclosure as a market rate home. In this case, you will need to repay that home's portion of lift loan from any of the sales proceeds that you'll receive from your share of the equity. This may be a little complicated, so please let your development officer know as soon as you know about any foreclosures. We do have our own annual monitoring process in addition to these operating agreement requirements. These start the beginning of the year after your first home sale, but it shouldn't be too much work. You'll need to fill out a form called the Certificate of Continuing Compliance each year, pay an annual charge of $25 per home per year, and submit a few annual documents like your financials, tax returns, and insurance certificates. Noted here in the slide, please do make sure that you have budgeted for our annual charge, especially when determining the ground lease fee. While that amount can be subject to change, we work really hard to make adjustments elsewhere if we need to before touching any of these long-term costs. Finally, just a quick reminder that your lift loan operating agreement and affordability period is for 20 years. At that 20-year point, your loan will come due. And at this stage, you have 3 options to move forward. The first is that you can repay your lift loan in full. We'll release all of the legal documents and your property will return to the market rate. The second option that you can sign up for is another 20-year operating agreement and affordability period. In this case, we'll consider the loan satisfied and release any liens, but we will file the new operating agreement and affordability covenant on the property. You'll need to continue to follow our compliance requirements for what will end up being a full 40-year term, so 20 years plus 20 years. The final option of the two, or the final option is a mix of the two. So you could pay off a little bit of the loan and sign a shorter operating agreement, or you could pay off a few of the homes and have those returned to market rate while extending the affordability on the other homes. If that's something that interests you down the line in 20 years, reach out to whoever will be your primary contact at the time. And if it's still a development officer, definitely reach out to them. And they'll be able to work with you to negotiate a new agreement that works for everyone involved. And that's actually really the last of my content. Are there any questions about long-term compliance? All right. Well, then I just wanted to point out that I recognize that this was a lot of information crammed into an hour and 8 minutes. This was sort of a crash course, and I don't expect you to remember anything that I said today, or not, definitely something, but you don't need to remember everything that I said today. There's not going to be a quiz. So the video itself will be posted online. As I said, we'll also move the questions in the chat into an FAQ. In addition to that, we do have a lot of resources available for you as you move through the process or explore the program a little bit more. The first recommendation will be to refer you to our lift manual available online. Most of what we shared will be in that manual. We're working on an amendment to the manual. It's really small, but you should expect that amendment to come as a temporary rule change later this month. You should also refer to your applicable NOFA. The applicable NOFA is mentioned a lot in the lift manual, and that means the NOFA that your project was awarded under. So if you applied in 2021, then you'll want to refer to the 2021 NOFA document for that project. If you apply this year, then you should save the NOFA document somewhere, so you'll have that for reference. Once you have an application started or in the middle of a project, there will be a lot of information in your Procorum Work Center. Elizabeth and Susie will maintain a list of tasks that are needed for whatever phase your project is in, and the folders are filled with helpful guides, videos, and blank forms. So if you ever need a resource, be sure to check there. If you have any questions at any point, please reach out to your development officer. Elizabeth and Susie are always happy to help you with anything. If you're new to Lyft or working on a new application, then please feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'm also happy to talk about our policies, our application requirements, or to help you decide if Lyft is right for you. If you're interested in applying in 2026 or 2027, I wanted to flag a few important dates for you. The first is that we'll be hosting another training this same time next Thursday, Applying with Confidence, a step-by-step guide to the homeownership development NOFA process. This training will cover what program will be included in the NOFA, or what programs will be included, the new biennial multi-step process, and other important details to ensure that you're ready to apply. The NOFA itself will launch on January 26th. The timing will vary, but we'll send out a technical advisory as soon as that document's available online. Finally, on January 29th, 2026, we'll host one more training session called Application Essentials Scoring Rubric to Submission. And this will be more technically focused on specific items published with the NOFA. So we'll go over the scoring rubric and application document and generally cover intake through the first stage of due diligence. If you're invited to complete due diligence, we will likely have an additional virtual training for the first round of invited applicants that'll include those more technical details on the second and third stages of the due diligence process, as well as closing and early construction requirements. So keep an eye out for that. Last, we'll also be a part of a permanent affordability training that's being hosted by Habitat for Humanity Oregon. That'll be at the end of April in person in Sisters. And I'll actually briefly hand things over to Talia to talk about that.
Yeah, we are super excited about this training, and I'll put the homepage in the chat so anybody can go find out more. It's being hosted by Habitat for Humanity Oregon, as Jessica said, and we're partnering with them. And there's a series of webinars leading up to it. There's some information from the December 4th webinar, and then there will be some follow-up sessions afterwards, but we're really hoping to see a lot of you there. And so I recommend reaching out to Habitat if you're interested. We'll cover during the in-person training, they'll cover a lot of the foundations of operating a permanent affordability model, keeping in mind lift requirements. So it's a really good nexus between our program and then just practical application of permanent affordability. And oh, very cool, Liz. Excited that we'll be there with your birthday. There were a few other questions in the chat. Maybe we can just, Jessica, if you don't mind pulling up some of the dates for the NOFA launch and just a little bit of the timing since we have a little extra time. And the final guidelines for the NOFA will be published January 26th. That's the big day. So get your calendars ready for that. And then Jessica can just briefly walk through some of the dates, but she's going to go into that a lot more in depth next week.
Yeah, that's actually good timing. My next slide was just to ask if you had any any additional questions. So give me just a second and I'll find the dates here. All right. So since it's a biennial process, we're going to have a set of dates for 2026 projects and a set of dates for 2027 projects. For 2026, we're going to launch the NOFA on January 26th, 2026, and we'll start accepting your intake, which is that online form, right away. February 9th will be the first date that we'll accept your concept proposals for that first come, first serve selection. And May 3rd, 2026 will be the last date that we will accept concept proposals for the 2026 funds. If you're selected for due diligence, your deadline to get that done as a 2026 project is going to be November 3rd, 2026. And then we'll want you to close on your loan by February 26th, 2027. So you should have a full year to get through our application and closing process. And definitely, if you aren't or don't think you'll be able to close by February 26th, 2027, please consider yourself a 2027 applicant. I don't want to get into a situation where we get you most of the way through and then we have to take away your funding. That's not something that I want to do. For 2027 projects, we encourage you to apply as long as you can close by December 17th, 2027. This set of dates also starts at January 26th, 2026, and we'll start accepting your concept proposals on February 9th as well. So definitely, please feel free to submit your concept proposals for a 2027 project. Just as early as you want to submit them, you can pre-submit for the funding launch. We'll release the funding for this 2027 funding round on September 21st, 2026. If you have already, or if you pre-submitted your concept proposal, or if you were a 2026 applicant who didn't get selected for funding, your projects will roll over and be considered day one applications. So they'll probably go to a larger tiebreaker situation in that case. We will accept concept proposals until April 15th, 2027, but I definitely encourage you to apply as early as possible. We will probably run out of funding well before then. On April 15th, our set-asides are also going to merge. I don't know, that's going into too much detail. I'll talk about that next week. September 3rd will be the final deadline for due diligence for 2027 projects. Sorry, September 3rd, 2027. And then that final closing deadline is December 17th, 2027. So hopefully that was helpful and able to answer those date questions.
Jessica, do you mind pulling up? We're getting a little ahead of ourselves for next week, but we have the time, so we might as well. Do you mind pulling up the per entity project, per entity amount cap? There's a bunch of questions about that in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
And then while you're pulling that up, Scott will generally be able to get you a work center within 48 hours, especially during the busy period. We'll make sure to be equitable about the timing around that, because we know that that matters. And also the NOFA will go live on January 2026, but we'll have a buffer period before we start accepting the concept proposals. Go for it, Jessica.
Oh yeah, and I was just going to add, we're going to be very consistent in those first couple of weeks, making sure that intakes go quickly through to getting the Procorum work centers added. But since we're accepting intakes for over a year, we do ask if you're kind of going to be applying in December of 2026 or something to please allow us 7 days just so that we can work it into our schedule. All right, so moving on to these organizational biennial caps. I know in the past we have had kind of a maximum amount per project. This year we're moving to a maximum amount of funding to your organization per biennium that'll be flexible among your projects. So you can have a lot of smaller projects of smaller amounts, or you can have one really big project, or kind of a mix of both. We aren't going to require you to prioritize these. We're not going to require you to prioritize most of these projects. And we're not going to review all of the first priority projects, then all of the second priority projects like we have in the past. Instead, all of your applications will generally be considered equal in the first come, first served process. And we have 3 different biennial caps depending on your organization's experience. So if you're already an experienced LIFT partner, you've completed a LIFT project before, you haven't had any major leadership changes, and you meet another small set of experience standards, then you can be eligible for up to $16 million for the biennium. That could be one $16 million project or 16 $1 million projects, whatever works for you. Experienced developers don't have lift experience, but they do have development experience, or they're contracting with an experienced development consultant. You'll be eligible for up to $14 million for the biennium, and then all other applicants will be eligible for up to $10 million for the biennium. And then, of course, you'll need to meet our application standards, but you don't have to meet any additional standards to get that cap. I was going to say something else. Oh, yeah, I was going to mention also in our tiebreaker, we are going to ask you to tell us your first priority application. You don't have to tell us any other priorities. You can have one application that is your first priority. And if you get into a tiebreaker, then that'll give you a small boost or a bonus to your tiebreaker, just to make sure that if you haven't gotten any funding, but other people have, then you maybe get a little bit of an advantage, so that we're not stacking all of our funding on a single entity. But it is possible, because it's just some points in the tiebreaker, that other projects might still score higher. Anything else in the chat you want me to bring up, Talia?
We're getting a lot of questions. So, and maybe you could help me with a date here. So to Justin's question, Justin asked us first come, first serve, clock start on 2/9 with people submitting their concept proposals. And I just wanted you to walk through the distinction between 2026 and what I couldn't remember the exact date for the 2027 project. So just, do you want to just restate how that works for each year?
Yeah, so the 2026 concept proposal date. So we'll post the NOFA in January, and then we will start accepting concept proposals on that date in February. I guess I can scroll back to the dates. Okay, February 9th, 2026. We don't judge first come, first serve by time. So long as you submit between 12:01 in the morning and 11:59 at night, all of those submissions are considered the same submission date. And then if we don't have enough funding to support everybody who submits on that date, we'll do a tiebreaker. If we do, then later submissions will be fine, and eventually we'll probably have to reach a tiebreaker if a lot of people come in the first week or so. In 2027, we're launching the application, and we'll start accepting your applications on February 9th. We will ask you to flag if this is going to be a 2026 project or a 2027 project. If you have flagged that this is going to be a 2027 project, we will keep it, and we will put it kind of in our 2027 bucket and store it until we reach this September 2026 date where we release the funds. On this September 21st date, we'll take your 2027 applications out of storage, and we'll take the 2026 applications that didn't receive funding, and we will consider all of these applications to have been submitted on September 21st, 2026. Other people, if you didn't submit early, but you submit on September 21st, 2026, those will be equal in that tiebreaker to the folks that submitted early. So day one and prior will all kind of be considered the same day. So I hope that's the question that you're getting at.
Thanks, Jessica. And can you remind everybody, what period did we settle on for leadership change? What time period is the look back? Is it 2
Oh,
years?
yeah. It's not on the slide, but it is 2 years. I literally just updated our NOFA document with that number. Yeah, 2 years. Sorry.
And Rachel, you had a good question. Does Lyft rental experience count towards experience Lyft partner? If you haven't done home ownership, we have a whole development history section and a capacity section, and that will be a place where you can share your experience with other projects of similar scope and size, even if they're not home ownership projects or Lyft home ownership projects. Oh, but you're asking, is that related to the cap?
Yeah, I think the question is if they've successfully completed a Lyft project, if we're counting Lyft rental projects in our experienced Lyft partner category. And that's a really good question, Talia. I don't think you and I have made that decision. So maybe we'll need to take that offline and come back with an answer to that next week.
Jessica, do you want to pull up one last slide that shows the money available for each year?
Sure. I know that's somewhere. Is this the one that you're looking for, Talia?
Yeah, so there was a question about how much Lyft funding is available in 2026 and 2027. So hopefully this answers your question. And this doesn't include the 25 million set aside that we've reserved for factory produced housing. That is being held until those projects are selected. And then when that money, if not all the projects are funded, and homeownership projects will have some extra money that flows back into our NOFA and can go to the general pool of applicants. So there's more than this 75 million here, but you don't see it here right now.
Yeah, and I'll make a note that we actually have a very specifically written out process in the NOFA document that kind of details what happens with those funds when they come back and what time those funds come back. So yeah, look for that in the NOFA document. It's very in the weeds, but it is there.
So hopefully this is a teaser to all the nitty-gritty details that Jessica is going to go into in a future training, and also what will be hopefully very clearly laid out in our NOFA when it posts on January 26th. So get ready for some really exciting reading.
Yeah, and we're going to try to provide as much helpful materials as possible. We'll have a document checklist and a detailed explanation of the multi-step process and what you need to do at different stages. So yeah, we're doing our best to make this transition to the new phase as easy as possible. All right, well, it is 3:29, so I don't want to keep anyone past our ending time, but I do hope to see most of you next week as an indication that you're all going to apply. That would be really exciting. But thank you all so much for your time and for joining us today. Thank you for your interest and commitment to providing affordable housing. We couldn't do our jobs without you, so we're definitely grateful for your partnership. And yeah, Happy New Year, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week.